Welcome back to the Brittany Hughes Show, everybody. Happy Thursday to you. The Trump administration and DOGE, headed up by Elon Musk, continue to forge ahead with chopping government waste and finding fraud, waste, and abuse. And for the most part, it's been pretty glorious to behold. It's provided no small amount of hilarity, mostly because of the left-wing meltdowns over it. It's kind of fun watching their heads explode over common sense. And of course, when you're dealing with a multi-trillion-dollar behemoth like the federal government and you're trying to save any substantial amount of money whatsoever, or you're trying to cut dead weight off of a bloated system that is actively fighting you on it on a daily basis, that's going to be a lot easier said than done. I think that we've seen that over the past few weeks. I think many of DOGE's efforts have been absolutely fantastic. I think that some have maybe been a little bit hasty. We kind of have a sort of slash and burn method going on here. But I will say, if government had not ballooned into this massive bloated monster that has just been hemorrhaging our cash on a daily basis like it's monopoly money, we would not be in this mess in the first place, and it wouldn't be taking a chainsaw to try to cut through all of this. And it turns out Americans are absolutely loving it. The vast majority of Americans are all about this. The fact that somebody finally, I mean, after so many years, decades even, of us screaming about the irresponsible use of our tax dollars and all of the garbage that we have just been dumping billions of dollars of our cash into while we've all been working until, April just to pay our tax bill. I mean, I read somewhere this week that Americans will spend roughly a third of their working adult lives just earning money to pay taxes. A third of your working adult life. And for what? For what? What are Americans getting out of this deal? So the fact that somebody is finally saying, look, if we're going to tax people, if we're going to forcibly take money that they earned and pump it into this system and then claim that it's to provide public services that the country needs, we had better be able to say how we're spending that money and prove that we're spending it as wisely as possible and then chop anything that doesn't at least meet that basic criteria. And people are responding favorably to that because it is common sense, right? 3 out of 4 people, actually, according to a new Harris survey that found that 76% of Americans polled said that they support a full-scale effort to find and eliminate fraud and waste in government. I'm assuming the other 24% just don't pay taxes, because I cannot imagine if you pay taxes that you would not want to find and eliminate fraud and waste in government. This is your money that is being funneled into a system that is then wasting it on crap. Why wouldn't you want some accountability? 72% said, quote, there should be a U.S. government agency focused on efficiency initiatives like DOGE. 72%, 60% said that DOGE is helping make major cuts in government expenditures, which is true. Another 70% said government spending is filled with waste, fraud, and inefficiency. 69% said they do support the goal of cutting $1 trillion in spending. This is just common sense stuff. This is stuff that Americans across the board, this should not even be a partisan issue. This shouldn't be Republican, Democrat, conservative, liberal, whatever. This is just the responsible spending of taxpayer money, which everybody with common sense should agree upon. And anybody else is either a moron or they didn't understand the question, or both. Or maybe they've just been listening to the news media that is so desperately trying to convince us that President Donald Trump is quite obviously the devil, to which I would say, I think that jig is up, okay? I mean, that doesn't really work anymore. Too many people have seen the man behind the curtain here, I think. And I think the left-wing media have done a fantastic job of exposing that after 4 years of the crap show that was the Biden administration running this country into the ground while Biden just stood there drooling on his own shoes, and we were all being told that his mental faculties were perfectly fine. He was sharp as a tack, nothing to see here. And everybody could see that that was not true. It was obvious. 4 years of watching prices skyrocket, 4 years of realizing, just how much social media companies had been censoring anybody who dared to question the government line, and the amount of water that the mainstream media were carrying 4 years of COVID crackdowns and watching, men invade women's spaces, and you can't buy eggs at the grocery store, but we can spend billions of dollars in foreign aid to just about everybody else. 4 years of watching illegal aliens to the tune of millions flood into this country and overwhelm cities and, be dumped into your backyard. Nobody is buying the line anymore, I don't think, that Trump is publicly enemy number one here, unless you're like, I don't know, a purple-haired, non-binary lesbian with a degree in genderless art studies or something. In which case, I've got to assume that you probably couldn't pour water out of a boot if the instructions were on the heel. So everybody with a working prefrontal cortex here has wised up, if they hadn't already. Oh, but the media just keep trying. Do they not? Do they not? Admit that they were wrong? Of course not. Of course not. We can't have that. So they're going to keep running the same line and playing the same broken record that they have for the past 8-10 years at this point. This might be my very favorite story from the past week, by the way. It's getting harder and harder to choose these days. But this one might actually take the cake for me. It's for the Washington Post. And Trump is the devil. Remember, we got to start with the premise that Trump is the devil. Because on top of having the audacity to demand that gender-deluded men stay out of women's bathrooms, now Trump is laying off the only people in the world, apparently, who can free victims trapped inside bathrooms that they don't want to be in. We got a full frontal bathroom assault here. Clearly, we're dealing with an evil mastermind. So, ever the stalwart defender of truth, the bastion of journalism that is the Washington Post actually ran an entire article on how Trump's slashing of government bureaucracy and saving billions of taxpayer dollars is now causing chaos, I tell you, at our national parks, in part by his laying off the only federal employees in the entire country who carry around the keys to national park public bathrooms. You can't make this stuff up. Here's what the Post actually reported. At California's Yosemite National Park, the Trump administration fired the only locksmith on staff on Friday. He was the sole employee with the keys and the institutional knowledge needed to rescue visitors from locked restrooms. Oh yes, you read that right. It takes institutional knowledge and probably like 42 permits and 3 third-party inspections and an audit and a partridge in a pear tree to let stuck people out of the crapper on federal property. Institutional knowledge. Now, at first glance, I did think to myself, now, if we think really, really hard about it, we really use our gray matter up here, surely we can come up with some solution to this little potty problem. I mean, you're telling me that the issue, the crisis at hand here is that we've got one dude with the key to the bathroom for this whole national park. Now, what could we possibly do to fix that? Let's use our noggins here. I mean, I know I'm not a rocket scientist or anything, but I feel like there's got to be a solution there somewhere. But judging by the Washington Post's abject horror over this crisis, remember, they called it chaos, right? This is creating chaos at our national parks. I can only assume that this one lone, now jobless federal employee is either incapable or somehow barred from handing over the sacred bathroom key to literally anybody else, which apparently is going to leave Yosemite's 4 million annual visitors without any reliable way of relieving themselves without, finding themselves trapped inside a germ-infested toilet stall for the rest of their miserable days while the remaining few park employees that Trump has let work at this place, they look on helplessly for want of a single locksmith. That is the crisis. That is the apocalyptic scenario that the Washington Post is painting to try to paint this picture of Donald Trump just completely decimating our entire federal infrastructure. By the way, this keeper of the sacred crapper key, this only one, did I mention that he's only worked full-time at this park since March? I mean, what did we do before then? I mean, I assume that up until then, Yosemite, by the way, is about the size of Rhode Island. I assume that the bathrooms were just like littered with the bones of abandoned park goers who went in for a pee only to find themselves trapped inside a toilet nightmare. Is that when we finally wised up and realized that we needed somebody with a key? I mean, that's the way that it sounds, right? The Washington Post reports, we have a federal court administrative buildings, toilets, closets, and gun safe, said Vince. who started working as a permanent employee at the park in March after 4 years as a seasonal employee. God forbid we fire Vince. He said, "We have endless things that need to be secured in various forms, and I'm the sole keeper of those keys. The one that makes the keys, the one that fixes the locks, installs the locks, and has all that knowledge of the security behind the park. And so it's a critical role. Well, it's a good thing the West's only locksmith never keeled over from a heart attack, or I guess we'd have been screwed a lot sooner than this. May God spare us from evil regimes that steal the bathroom key." This is what the media wants us to believe is a crisis. We got Vince here, and he makes the keys for the doors at Yosemite, and he's been there less than a year, don't know what we did before him. And this is how he and the Washington Post are trying to justify his full-time, year-round, taxpayer-funded salary and benefits. I mean, you know you're kind of dead weight when you get asked point blank to justify why your job should even be a job, and what you come up with is, "I have the bathroom key." And this is the kind of nonsense that we're talking about here. This is the kind of bloated garbage, when it's all added up, comes out to millions and even billions of dollars, where it's happening. And before Trump 2.0 and before Doge and Elon Musk, we had no idea it was even happening, because it was occurring on such a mass scale that you couldn't even wrap your mind around it, which, by the way, I do think has been part of the government defense structure for a long time. If it's so huge that you don't even know how to begin to take a bite out of it, then maybe nobody would ever try. I mean, we've got a zillion Vinces running around with jobs that shouldn't be jobs, or could be part-time jobs, or could be contractor positions, and could be saving, tons of taxpayer money. But if the government is so big, and if we have so much of that, then it's going to be so overwhelming of a job to try to cut all of that stuff that nobody's going to bother. And now it's happening, and the system is terrified. Because now not only are we starting to get to the bottom of just how much money we have been dumping on idiotic crap, and I don't even think we've begun to scratch the surface, by the way, if I'm being honest with you. Not only that, but we're finally starting to see some consequences for people who've gotten away with this mess for far too long. Our new director of national intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, announced this week that the intelligence community, which consists of, the CIA, the FBI, the NSA, several other agencies, are firing 100 or so employees who were exposed earlier this week as having used an official internal chat room meant for government business to discuss in graphic detail their transgender surgeries, their bizarre sexual fetishes, and even their desires to have intersex children so they can raise them to be genderless weirdos. So this is a report that should only shock you if you have not been paying attention. Investigative journalist Christopher Rufo uncovered conversations from an unclassified chat room used by government employees within multiple intelligence agencies that shows employees discussing all this stuff and more on taxpayer-funded government time. This investigation found online conversations that took place over Intel Link, which is a chat room that's used by the National Security Agency and other intel agencies, supposedly to discuss official government business, right? This is supposedly an online internal chat room that's used by employees of different agencies to communicate with one another about mission-essential government business. According to an NSA press official, all NSA employees sign agreements stating that publishing non-mission related material on Intel Link is a usage violation and will result in disciplinary action. And a fat lot of good that did. Because we now know, thanks to Christopher Rufo and his diligent hard work, that NSA and other Intel employees were using at least 2 chat rooms on Intel Link to discuss things like their transgender surgeries, particularly male to female procedures, as well as pronoun use. They were sharing graphic details of their sex lives and fantasies, and all of this was on company work time that you paid for. And they get pretty graphic. But hey, you paid for it. It was your dollars that went into this, so here we go. I've found that I like being penetrated. Never liked it before GRS, gender reconstruction surgery. But all the rest is just as important as well, one NSA employee reportedly wrote in this chat room. Now, this was referring to his gender reconstruction surgery that gave him a manufactured vagina and castrated him in the process. One very popular chat topic, apparently, was male to female transgender surgery, which of course involves surgically removing a penis, turning it into an artificial vagina, and all of the additional things that go along with feminizing a biological male. One employee reportedly with the Defense Intelligence Agency wrote, quote, "One of the weirdest things that gives me euphoria is when I pee, I don't have to push anything down to make sure it aims right." Oh, it's the simple joys in life, isn't it? Oh my gosh. Another employee who had recently undergone hair removal procedures in support of his gender identity wrote, quote, "Getting my butthole zapped by a laser was shocking." Company time. On your dime. These employees also discussed estrogen treatment and breast implants. One person wrote, medical science is going to give me tits one way or another. Sorry. Not my usual vernacular, I get that, but these are some of the people in the federal government, particularly in agencies that comprise literally the most powerful spying machine in the world, who take your money to fund their salaries while they sit at work in their cubicle or maybe their dining room table, I don't know, whatever, discussing this on work time. The chat room also revealed employees openly discussing polyamory, which is, of course, having relationships with multiple people, orgies, and sexual fetishes, including being peed on. At one point, one member claimed to use its pronouns, not he, she, not they, them, not she, her, not whatever, but its. Because apparently this person did not identify with humanity in general. That was an actual discussion on these chat rooms, and it prompted an in-depth conversation between employees on correct pronoun use. Some of these conversations spanned the course of hours. Hours. Now, look, I don't believe that this actually represents the majority of federal workers. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that, the vast majority even of the intel community, I don't think that this is indicative. I know way too many people who work in that space personally to believe that this is the average Joe. Okay, but that kind of leads me to my next point, which is that this behavior, this mental illness, has been so normalized in the government all the way up to the top levels, and anybody who doesn't agree with it, anybody who doesn't fall into this category, which I actually think is the majority of people, including other government employees, are forced to shut up, are threatened with the loss of their jobs and even legal action if they have something to say about this. This was not some big secret, by the way. Apparently, at least the NSA knew on some level that this was going on and gave it the green light, because Rufo cited sources that told him that these chats were sanctioned under the NSA's commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and were actually counted as official work business under the banner of employee resource groups. Basically, Intel links should not be used for anything other than mission essential business unless you are a member of the gay, transgender, gender-bending, queer community who needs a safe space to talk about your sexual fetishes, in which case we can't say anything to you about it because we're terrified to. Okay, that's what we're dealing with here. This was known to agency officials and actually okayed because the federal government, and I don't know if this started before the Biden administration, but that buffoon certainly didn't make it better with all of the transgender butt kissing he did for 4 years. The federal government as a system is beginning to care more about making sure that mentally ill, gender-deluded people don't feel left out or get their feelings hurt than about the safety and security of this country. You can see it with the military's inclusion of gender-confused individuals. Never mind that gender dysphoria is a mental illness, a diagnosable mental illness. Never mind that these people have a far higher rate of anxiety, depression, and suicide, all things that greatly affect a person's ability to serve in some of the most high-stress situations on the planet, which is exactly what our military asks of its service members. It's more important to include them than to protect the safety, readiness, and effectiveness of our armed services. And now we find that it's been more important to make sure that gender-bending employees have a safe space to talk about, waxing their anuses and castrating themselves than it is to make sure that they are spending their time and taxpayer money doing the jobs that we are paying them to do. Because this ideology, this madness, this insane notion that we should not only be tolerating this, but defending it, promoting it, has infected our society like a cancer that now has to be surgically and at times painfully removed. And it's on every level, by the way. If you happen to live in Maryland, this one's coming at you. Lots of big news out of Maryland in case you missed it this week. For one thing, there's a new bill that's making its way through the Maryland state legislature that would ban parents from opting their own kids out of lessons on gender-bending ideology in school. So we're just training the next generation of CIA agents, apparently. So public schools in kindergarten, or public schools in Maryland, are already required by law to include lessons on gender identities starting in kindergarten, where children are as young as 5 years old. They're also required to teach sixth graders to, quote, define sex assigned at birth, gender identity, and gender expression. These are part of the official curriculum in the state of Maryland. These are requirements for public schools to teach to children as young as kindergarten. But the lessons here previously were included in the family life and human sexuality curriculum, which is a separate, typically like week-long course within the health education curriculum. All right, and parents are allowed, or at least have been, to opt their child out of those classes if they so choose. But not if leftists get their way, not anymore. So Fox 45 Baltimore reported this week that in a 95-39 vote, the Democrat-controlled House of Representatives in Maryland last Friday passed HB 0161. I'm giving you that so that if you live in Maryland, you can know what we're talking about here. This would remove gender identity lessons from family life classes and would instead place them in the general curriculum. So you can opt your kids out of the family life classes, but you can't opt them out of general classes, which means that parents will no longer have the option to pull their child out of lessons on gender identity and expression and pronouns. As a matter of fact, if they're in general classes, then you don't necessarily even know when they would be taking place. You just send your kid off to school that day having no idea that a whole bunch of propaganda about gender bending and, chemical castration and lessons on whether or not they were born in the wrong body is just going to get shoved down their throats at 5, 6, 7 years old. And leftists are not even trying to be crafty about this, by the way. So House Ways and Means Committee Chair Vanessa Atterbury, who is a Democrat who co-sponsored this bill, openly admitted that the goal of this bill is to push gender ideology on children without their parents being able to opt them out of it. She said, quote, "The purpose of this framework is to make sure that all of our children feel included when they attend school, to make sure that they feel represented." Well, if you are a Christian, or, a member of another faith that does not believe that you can just change your gender at will, that believes that, God designed male and female as a non-transferable, unique system with a purpose, I guess you don't get to feel represented. You don't get to feel included. If you are a parent that just wants to send your child to school to learn reading, writing, and arithmetic without having a whole bunch of leftist ideology, just shoved down their throats at the point of a government gun while you sit at home and have no idea that it's even happening that day and you can't opt them out of it, you certainly don't feel included or represented. Amazing. Amazing how people that disagree with this never get included or represented, right? We don't seem to matter. Just a couple days after that bill was passed, by the way, which has not become law. It's important to emphasize that. But the Democrats do control the Maryland government, the Maryland state legislature, and the governor's house. So it's every likelihood that this bill will, in fact, end up becoming a law. Right after that bill was passed, the Maryland House advanced another bill. This one's a doozy here, that would allow condoms to be sold in all school vending machines. Unless you heard me incorrectly, I said all school vending machines, to include preschool and elementary schools. This one is House Bill 380, and it would, quote, allow contraceptives to be sold in nursery school, preschool, elementary, and high school vending machines, according to Fox 45. It would repeal a current law that makes it a misdemeanor to sell or offer contraceptives in a school vending machine, because doing so currently carries a $1,000 penalty. By the way, it is absolutely insane that we even needed a law to state that in the first place, that we even needed a law to say you can't sell or offer condoms in vending machines in public schools. Why did that even need to be stated? That should just be common sense. Nobody should be wanting to do that. That should not be a thing that adults have any reason to want to do, particularly at the elementary and middle school level. That's insane. Even more insane is the fact that now Democrats want to repeal that law, which shouldn't have been necessary in the first place, so that schools can now choose to put condoms right there in vending machines. Kids can get them for a quarter. How perverted do you have to be as an adult that it would even cross your mind to do this, much less to craft a bill that lets condoms be put in vending machines in nursery schools? That's a stipulation they could have included, by the way. Now, I'm not advocating for condoms in vending machines in any public schools at all. I don't think they should be in any of them. But if Democrats wanted to avoid the criticism that they were passing out condoms to elementary school students, they could have passed a bill, they could have written a bill that says, okay, you can do this, but only at the high school level. Still not okay, right? Because we're still dealing with A, children, minors, B, children as young as, what are you, 14? 14 when you go to high school? You're dealing with other people's children, so now you're providing them with contraceptive devices and their parents can't do anything to stop it. Whole host of reasons why they shouldn't be in public schools at all. Okay, but that's not even what they did. What they did was repeal a law and pave the way for condoms to be put in any public school, to include preschool and elementary schools, which I guess is fantastic news for all of the perverted teachers we've seen coming out of the woodwork getting caught having sex with students. I mean, good golly, this is crazy. Now, the bill is not a mandate. I should say the bill is not a mandate. Schools themselves would be responsible for deciding whether to put, prophylactics next to the Dorito bags available to 4-year-olds. But it's one step closer to mandating that we just pass out rubbers to children. It's one step away from basic sanity and decency. I mean, after all, we've got leftists who want to teach 4- and 5-year-olds about gender bending and sexuality. So this is not a stretch to put, vending machines full of condoms right outside the classrooms where they just learned about oral sex. Teachers passing out little gift baggies with, Trojans and abortion pills while their first graders are on their way to gym class where they'll get shoved into co-ed locker rooms for inclusion. This is absolute madness, and this is where we're at now. We are so far down the rabbit hole. This isn't even liberal versus conservative, Democrat versus Republican at this point. This is good versus evil. This is basic common sense and decency versus abject depravity and madness. This is not just about digging out fraud, waste, and abuse and getting government spending under control. This is not just about saving taxpayer dollars, which I am all about 100%. Don't get me wrong, we should be doing that, and the Trump White House is the first that I've seen ever in my lifetime who is doing anything at all and gotten at all serious about that. But this also has to be about eradicating this insane ideology right here. It's not just about the waste of our taxpayer dollars. It's about what our taxpayer dollars are being wasted on. The promotion of leftist ideology, the propaganda that is targeting our children. And we had best be ready for a fight here. Because the one thing that the left loves more than anything else on this planet is finding new and greater ways to do evil and then using your cash to pay for it. And with that, that's the Brittany Hughes Show for today. Thank you so much for joining me. I'll be back here next Thursday. I hope you will too. In the meantime, head over to Apple Podcasts, hit the subscribe button on the Brittany Hughes Show so you won't ever miss an episode. You can also subscribe to the Newsbusters podcast with Tim Graham on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. In the meantime, I will see you back here next Thursday. I hope you have a great week and a great weekend. God bless.